Wounded Dog led him to an unbreakable bond, a story of love and rescue. Daniel Carter had always been a man of quiet routines. Every morning he woke up at 6, made himself a cup of black coffee, and stood by his window watching the waves roll onto the shore. His small bookshop, Carter's Books and More, opened at 9 sharp. It wasn't a busy store, just a cozy little place in the heart of the coastal town, filled with the scent of old paper and ocean air. 3 years ago, Daniel's wife, Margaret, had passed away. And with her, he had lost the warmth that made his house a home. He used to love the sound of laughter in the kitchen, the way she hummed while watering the plants. But now silence filled the corners of his life, heavy and suffocating. He rarely spoke more than necessary. The townspeople were kind, but they knew better than to push him into conversations. The only real interactions he had were with customers who stopped by, flipping through books, paying with quiet smiles. Even then, he kept things short. But that night, everything changed. It had been a long day. Rain had started falling in the late afternoon, drumming against the bookstore's windows. By closing time, the sky was dark, and the wind howled through the streets. Daniel locked up and pulled his coat tighter as he walked the short path home. The town was quiet, the streets empty except for flickering streetlights. Then he heard it, a faint, desperate sound, a howl. He stopped, his heart pounding. The wind carried the sound again, a cry, raw and broken. It came from the direction of the beach. Daniel hesitated. It wasn't his concern. Stray dogs came and went in this town. He should just go home, make himself a cup of tea, and ignore it. But his feet didn't move. The sound wasn't just a stray barking at the wind. It was different, pained, pleading, a sound of something that had been fighting too long, something about to give up. Cursing under his breath, Daniel turned and followed the noise. The beach was nearly invisible in the storm. The rain pelted his face as he stumbled over rocks and driftwood, his flashlight barely cutting through the darkness. Then he saw her, a dog. She was lying near the rocks, her body half hidden by sand and seaweed. A large, thin creature, her fur soaked, her ribs showing. She tried to lift her head but collapsed again, a soft whimper escaping her throat. Daniel swallowed hard. He should leave. He should turn around and forget he ever saw her. But then, a movement beside her caught his eye. Something small, a tiny, shivering puppy curled against her belly. Daniel's breath caught. The mother dog had shielded her pup from the storm, using her own body as a shield. Her front leg was badly injured, a deep wound running along her side. But even now, even as she lay there half-broken, she was curled around her baby, protecting him. A lump rose in Daniel's throat. He had spent the last 3 years convincing himself that he didn't need anyone, that he was better off alone. But here, right in front of him, was a creature who had fought through pain and exhaustion just to keep someone else safe. And she was looking at him now, her golden eyes dull but full of something that made his chest tighten. Trust. She was asking him for help. Daniel knelt beside them, his hands shaking. "You're not going to make this easy for me, are you?" he muttered. The dog barely moved, but her eyes stayed on him. The puppy gave a weak little whimper. Daniel let out a long sigh. He was going to regret this. Gently, he reached out and scooped the puppy up, cradling the small, trembling body against his chest. The mother gave a low whine, trying to lift her head. "I'm not leaving you," Daniel said quickly. "I promise." Carefully, he wrapped his coat around the mother dog and lifted her into his arms. She was heavier than she looked, but she didn't struggle. She was too weak to fight. As he turned back toward home, his soaked boots sinking into the wet sand, Daniel realized something strange. For the first time in years, his house wouldn't be empty when he walked inside. And maybe, just maybe, that didn't feel so bad.
Daniel's arms ached by the time he reached his house. The storm had soaked him to the bone, and the dog in his arms had gone still, her breathing shallow. He didn't know if that was a good thing or a very, very bad one. The puppy, small, no bigger than a loaf of bread, was tucked inside his jacket, pressed against his chest for warmth. Occasionally it whimpered, but mostly it was silent. Too silent. Daniel kicked the door open with his foot, stepping into the dimly lit living room. His house was as cold as the storm outside. He never bothered turning the heat up much. What was the point when it was just him? But tonight, it wasn't just him. He moved quickly, laying the mother dog onto an old towel near the fireplace. The puppy curled up beside her instantly, tucking itself under her chin. Daniel's heart squeezed at the sight. She hadn't fought him, hadn't growled or snapped, not even when he carried her in his arms. It wasn't normal for a stray to be this trusting. But then again, maybe she knew she didn't have another choice. Kneeling beside her, Daniel hesitated. He had no idea what he was doing. It had been years since he'd even owned a dog, let alone tried to save one's life. His hands hovered over her body. Where do I even start? Her fur was matted with dirt and seaweed, and he could see the ugly gash along her front leg. Dried blood crusted the wound, and every few seconds she trembled violently. Daniel swallowed hard. "Okay, girl, we've got to clean you up." He stood and grabbed supplies, an old washcloth, warm water, a bottle of antiseptic he had no idea was still in his medicine cabinet. He hesitated before grabbing an old blanket, one Margaret used to keep draped over the couch. As he knelt back down, the mother dog opened her eyes. They were golden, deep and soulful, watching him with something he didn't expect. Trust! She wasn't afraid of him. Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "You're a strange one, you know that?" he murmured. He dipped the washcloth into the warm water and pressed it gently against her wound. She flinched but didn't pull away. He worked slowly, carefully wiping away the dirt, revealing raw, torn skin underneath. His fingers brushed over her ribs, counting each one beneath her thin fur. Too skinny, too weak. She hadn't been eating properly for a long time. Daniel glanced at the puppy. It was tiny, barely a few weeks old, but healthy. Which meant, despite everything, despite her own suffering, this mother had been feeding her baby. He felt something tighten in his chest. "You kept him alive," he murmured. "Even when it meant starving yourself." The dog let out a soft huff, closing her eyes again. Daniel sat back on his heels, exhaling. The storm still howled outside, rain lashing against the windows, but inside a strange sort of calm had settled. The puppy let out a tiny, tired sigh and burrowed deeper into its mother's fur. Daniel ran a hand down his face. "What the hell am I supposed to do with you two?" A knock at the door made him jump. He got to his feet, stepping over a pile of books, and opened the door to find Rebecca Hayes standing there, wrapped in a thick raincoat, her auburn hair damp from the storm. Daniel blinked. "Rebecca?" She frowned. "Why do you look surprised? You called me." He had? Oh, right. Somewhere between carrying the dog home and realizing he had no idea how to help her, Daniel had grabbed his phone and called the only vet in town. Rebecca stepped inside, shaking off the rain. "You sounded weird on the phone. I thought maybe you were finally having a heart attack and decided to reach out before you dropped dead." Daniel rolled his eyes. "Always charming, aren't you?" She smirked. "Now where's this dog you kidnapped?" Daniel led her to the fireplace, where the mother dog and her puppy lay curled up on the towel. Rebecca's teasing expression softened immediately. "Oh," she breathed. "She's in rough shape." Daniel crossed his arms. "Can you help her?" Rebecca knelt beside the dog, her hands moving with the practiced ease of someone who had spent her life caring for animals. She checked the wound on the dog's leg, then ran her fingers gently over her ribs, the same way Daniel had. "She's malnourished," she murmured. "Dehydrated. This wound." She touched the deep cut on the dog's front leg, her lips pressing together. "It's old, at least a few days. She must have gotten caught on something. Barbed wire, maybe." Daniel's jaw tightened. Or worse. Rebecca didn't argue. The town had seen its share of mistreated animals, abandoned dogs left to fend for themselves. Some people had no business owning pets. She moved on to the puppy, checking its tiny body for injuries. "This little one looks good," she said, relief in her voice. A miracle, honestly. If the mother hadn't been feeding him, he wouldn't have made it. Daniel exhaled. "She saved him." Rebecca nodded. "Yeah, she did." They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling softly beside them. Then Rebecca said, "What are you going to do with them?" Daniel stiffened. He stopped. He hadn't thought that far. Rebecca glanced up at him, raising an eyebrow. "You planning on keeping them?" Daniel opened his mouth to say no, to say this is temporary and they're not mine. But then he looked at the mother dog again. The way she had shifted slightly to keep her puppy warm. The way her body had relaxed just a little now that she was inside, safe. He thought of the storm, the beach, that desperate pleading look in her eyes. And he knew the truth. He couldn't let them go. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Instead of answering, Daniel reached out and gently stroked the dog's head. And for the first time since he found her, she wagged her tail. Dad hadn't planned on keeping them. That's what he told himself as he placed a thick blanket beside the fireplace, making a makeshift bed for the mother dog and her puppy. The storm had finally died down, leaving behind an eerie silence outside. Inside, though, the house felt different. Less empty. Rebecca had stayed longer than expected, going over how to care for the dogs. Now she stood near the door, zipping up her coat. "You're sure you can handle this?" Daniel glanced at the two dogs curled up on the blanket. The mother had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep, her body still trembling slightly. The puppy, now nestled against her belly, let out tiny squeaks in his sleep. Daniel exhaled. "No," Rebecca smirked. "Honest, I like it." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small bottle. "Antibiotics. For her leg, twice a day with food, and try to get her to drink water as often as you can." Daniel took the bottle and nodded. "And if she doesn't make it?" Rebecca's smirk faded. "She's weak, Daniel, but she's a fighter. If she survived this long, she's got a chance." Daniel nodded again, though doubt curled in his chest. He had never been good with hope. Rebecca hesitated. Then, softer, she said, "And what about you?" Daniel frowned. "What about me?" Rebecca studied him for a long moment, then shook her head. "Nothing. Just don't push them away too quickly." Before he could respond, she opened the door and stepped into the cold night, leaving Daniel alone. Except, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't alone. Daniel sat in his old armchair, watching the fire crackle. He had turned off the lights, leaving only the glow of the flames dancing against the walls. He kept glancing at the mother dog, half expecting her to wake up and bolt. But she didn't. Instead, she slept. Deeply, peacefully, like she finally knew she was safe. The puppy stirred, letting out a tiny yawn before stretching his paws. Daniel let out a quiet chuckle. "You don't even know what's happened, do you, little guy?" The puppy didn't respond, of course. But something about him, so small, so innocent, made something in Daniel's chest ache. The mother dog shifted slightly, opening her golden eyes. She looked at him, not with fear, but with quiet understanding. It startled him. "I'm not your guy," he muttered. "I don't even know what I'm doing here." The dog blinked at him. Then slowly she moved her head, resting it on her front paws. It almost felt like she was saying, "Yes, you do." Daniel rubbed a hand down his face. "I need sleep." But even as he climbed the stairs to his bedroom, he knew he wouldn't be able to sleep. Not with the sound of soft breathing coming from the fireplace. Not with the strange, unfamiliar warmth in his chest. The next morning, Daniel woke up before his alarm. That was strange. For years, he had woken at 6 on the dot, no matter what. But today, something had stirred him earlier. He sat up, frowning, before realizing the house wasn't silent. Wasn't the heavy, empty quiet he had grown used to. Instead, he heard soft shuffling from downstairs, the occasional rustle. His pulse jumped. Had they left? Had the mother dog decided she was strong enough to run? Daniel threw on a sweater and hurried down the stairs, and stopped. There, standing unsteadily near the fireplace, was the mother dog. She was thin, still trembling slightly, but she was standing. Her ears perked up, we saw him, and for a moment he thought she might flinch. Instead, she just watched him. The puppy, on the other hand, had no such hesitation. The moment he spotted Daniel, he wobbled toward him on unsteady legs. Daniel stared. "What are you?" The puppy barked, a tiny, ridiculous yip that made Daniel blink. Then, to his absolute horror, the puppy bit his sock. Daniel took a step back. "Hey!" The puppy wagged its tail. Daniel scowled. "I am not a chew toy." The puppy barked again, even louder, and this time, the mother dog thumped her tail against the floor. Something inside Daniel cracked. He sighed. "Fine," he muttered. "Guess I'm feeding you both now." Feeding them was easier said than done. The mother dog sniffed at the food but barely ate. She let the puppy eat first, watching him carefully. Daniel frowned. "You have to eat too," he told her, sliding the bowl closer. She just blinked at him. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "You don't trust me yet, huh?" That stung more than he wanted to admit. He exhaled. "Okay, no rush." He sat down on the floor, keeping his distance. The puppy, once full, waddled toward him and promptly fell asleep against his leg. Daniel froze. The mother dog lifted her head slightly, eyes narrowing, as if judging him. He stayed perfectly still, and then, slowly, cautiously, she stretched out and rested her head on her paws again. She still didn't eat, but she didn't take the puppy away from him either. That was something. After a long silence, Daniel muttered, "Guess you need names, huh?" The puppy twitched in his sleep. Daniel thought for a moment. "You're a little troublemaker. Finn, maybe." Finn didn't object. Daniel glanced at the mother. "And you're something else." The way she watched over her pup, the way she had fought to keep him safe. "Luna," he said softly. "You look like a Luna." For the first time, her tail thumped. Daniel swallowed past the lump in his throat. "Yeah, Luna and Finn." He ran a hand down his face. "What the hell am I doing?" Daniel had spent years keeping to himself. He liked it that way. People in town were friendly enough, but after Margaret passed, he didn't want their pity, their invitations to dinner, or their worried glances when they thought he wasn't looking. So he built walls, not physical ones. His small bookshop still had an open door and he still nodded at folks when he passed them on the street. But emotionally, he had shut them all out. But Luna and Finn had other plans. Unexpected visitors. It started with Maggie Barnes, the town's most persistent source of gossip. 3 days after the storm, Daniel was stocking books when the bell above his shop door jingled. Maggie marched in, shaking rain off her umbrella. "Morning, Daniel," she said, her voice too sweet. Daniel narrowed his eyes. "Maggie?" She leaned against the counter. "Heard a rumor you've got yourself some new house guests." Daniel stiffened. "Where'd you hear that?" Maggie smirked. "Rebecca and Tom, and also Jake from the diner. Oh, and Mrs. Reynolds said she saw you buying dog food at the general store yesterday." Daniel sighed. Small towns. Maggie tapped her fingers against the counter. "So is it true? Are you finally letting some life back into that house of yours?" "They're just strays," Daniel muttered, straightening a pile of books. "It's temporary." Maggie snorted. "Uh-huh. That's what you said about that old record player Margaret bought, and yet it's still sitting in your living room." Daniel scowled. "This is different." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't. Maggie's sharp gaze softened slightly. "Well, temporary or not, you might need supplies. I brought some blankets and a bag of treats." Daniel hesitated. He should say no. He should refuse, just like he had refused every other offer of help for the past 3 years. But then he thought about Luna, still too weak to move much, and Finn, who had spent the morning chewing on the leg of Daniel's chair. "Thanks," he muttered. Maggie grinned. "Thought so." Maggie was the first visitor, but she wasn't the last. The next afternoon, Jake Mitchell showed up. Jake was 17, lanky and full of attitude. He had a reputation, skipping school, picking fights, running with the wrong crowd. People whispered about him, saying he'd end up in trouble one day. Daniel never paid much attention to town gossip, but Rebecca had mentioned Jake was having a rough time. His father had left when he was a kid, and his mother worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. So when Jake strolled into the bookshop and muttered, "Heard you got a dog," Daniel just raised an eyebrow. Daniel leaned against the counter and, Jake shrugged, "Just wondering if I could see him." Daniel studied him. The boy's hands were stuffed into his jacket pockets, his shoulders tense, like he expected Daniel to say no. "They're in the back." Jake's head snapped up. "Seriously?" "Unless you came here to buy a book," Daniel said dryly, "in which case I'd be shocked." Jake rolled his eyes but followed Daniel through the back door into the small yard behind the shop. Luna was lying on a blanket in the sun, eyes half closed, while Finn bounced around in the grass, ears too big for his little head. The moment Finn spotted Jake, he charged. Jake barely had time to react before the tiny pup crashed into his leg, yipping excitedly. For a second, Jake just stared. Then, without thinking, he crouched down, letting Finn climb onto his knee. "Whoa," Jake muttered. "He's tiny." Daniel watched as the boy ran a hand over Finn's soft fur. Finn responded by licking his fingers enthusiastically. Jake laughed. Daniel blinked. He had never heard Jake Mitchell laugh before. Luna, still lying on the blanket, lifted her head slightly, watching the interaction. Her tail thumped once against the ground. Jake glanced at her. "She doesn't trust me. She doesn't trust anyone yet," Daniel said. Give her time. Jake was quiet for a moment. Then softly he said, I know how that feels. Daniel felt something in his chest tighten. He could have ignored it, could have changed the subject, avoided the moment. But instead he said, yeah, I do too. Jake looked at him, searching his face. Maybe he found something there because he nodded and turned back to Finn, scratching behind the pup's ears. Can I come back tomorrow? He asked. Daniel hesitated. Then finally, yeah, kid, you can. Jake wasn't the only one who started showing up. By the end of the week, Daniel had a routine he hadn't asked for. Maggie stopped by with extra food and some old toys her grandkids didn't use anymore. Tom, the local handyman, offered to help build a small fenced-in area for Finn to run around. Rebecca made excuses to check on Luna, but mostly just teased Daniel about his growing collection of visitors. Even Mrs. Reynolds, the quiet librarian, came by with a book on dog training. Daniel had spent 3 years convincing himself that he was better off alone. But now, people lingered in his bookshop, asked about Luna and Finn, stayed for coffee instead of just buying a book and leaving. His house, once silent and cold, was now filled with paw steps, laughter, and the occasional chewed-up shoe, courtesy of Finn. And for the first time since Margaret passed, Daniel realized something. His life wasn't empty anymore. One evening, after everyone had left, Daniel sat on the porch steps, watching Finn wrestle with an old tennis ball. The sun was setting, casting warm golden light over the yard. It was peaceful. Then, soft footsteps behind him. Daniel turned. Luna was standing in the doorway. Not just watching, standing. For the first time since he rescued her, she had found the strength to leave her bed on her own. His breath caught. Hey, girl! Luna hesitated, then stepped forward, one paw, then another. Finn noticed and barked excitedly, wagging his whole body. Luna's ears flicked, but she didn't back away. Instead, she took another step, then another. And then, before Daniel could even process it, she sat beside him, right next to him, close enough that he could feel her warmth. Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. Didn't think you'd ever trust me, he murmured. Luna tilted her head, watching him with those deep golden eyes. Then, slowly, hesitantly, she leaned against his side. Daniel closed his eyes. He had thought he was the one saving her. But maybe, just maybe, she was saving him too. Daniel had almost convinced himself that things were finally settling down. Luna was healing. Finn was growing stronger and more playful by the day. Jake came by every afternoon, teaching Finn to fetch and laughing like he hadn't in years. Even Daniel himself had changed. He found himself looking forward to mornings now, to the quiet moments with Luna resting at his feet and Finn chewing on anything he could get his tiny teeth on. For the first time in 3 years, Daniel felt like he had a reason to wake up. But peace never lasts forever, and on a cold, grey afternoon, Luna's past came knocking. The day started like any other. Daniel was sweeping the bookshop floor when the doorbell chimed. He turned, expecting to see Jake or Maggie. Instead, a man stood in the doorway. Something about him set Daniel on edge immediately. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a faded leather jacket and boots covered in dried mud. His face was weathered, his beard patchy, and his eyes cold, sharp, calculating. "Can I help you?" Daniel asked, keeping his tone neutral. The man's gaze swept over the shop before settling on him. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough. "Heard you've got a dog. A big one. German Shepherd mix." Daniel's fingers tightened around the broom handle. Luna was in the back room with Finn, curled up on her favorite blanket. He kept his expression blank. "Lots of people have dogs." The man smirked. "Sure, but not my dog." The words sent ice through Daniel's veins. The man stepped forward, pulling something from his pocket, a faded photo. It was crumpled, but Daniel could see it clearly. Luna, only not as she was now. In the photo, she looked thinner, younger. There was a heavy chain around her neck, a deep scar just beginning to form along her flank. Her ears were pinned back, and her eyes, those golden eyes, held pure fear. Daniel's stomach twisted. This was him, the man who had hurt her. He forced himself to stay calm. "You're saying this is your dog?" "Yeah." The man pocketed the photo. "She ran off a few months ago. Been looking for her ever since." His tone was casual, too casual. Like he thought Daniel was stupid enough to believe he actually cared. Daniel folded his arms. "She doesn't have a collar. No microchip." "She did," the man said smoothly. Must have lost it. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Listen, I don't want trouble, just want my dog back. Daniel's pulse pounded. Every instinct screamed at him that this man was dangerous, and Luna was terrified of him. That told him everything he needed to know. She's not your dog, Daniel said flatly. The man's smile vanished. Excuse me? You heard me. Daniel's voice was low, steady. You abandoned her, left her for dead. That dog is not yours anymore. The man's jaw clenched. I could call animal control. Daniel didn't blink. Do it. The man hesitated. He hadn't expected resistance. Daniel stepped forward, his voice like steel. You and I both know what'll happen. They'll see the scars, the malnutrition, and they'll ask questions. His gaze darkened. Questions you don't want to answer. The man's hands curled into fists. For a long, tense moment, they just stared at each other. Then, with a sharp exhale, the man took a step back. You're making a mistake, he muttered. Daniel didn't respond. The man glanced around the shop one last time, then turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Daniel stayed rooted to the spot, his heart pounding. He forced himself to breathe. Then, slowly, he made his way to the back room. Luna was exactly where he left her, except now she was shaking. Finn was curled beside her, completely unaware of what had just happened. But Luna, she knew. She had heard his voice. She remembered Daniel crouched beside her. Hey, he murmured. It's okay. He's gone. She didn't move. Her ears were flat against her skull, her tail tucked. She was terrified. Daniel clenched his fists. The thought of that man ever laying his hands on her again made his blood boil. You're safe, he whispered, reaching out slowly. I promise. Luna flinched at first, but then, after a long moment, she leaned into his touch. Daniel swallowed past the lump in his throat. He had saved her once, and he would do it again. That night, Daniel called Rebecca. She answered on the second ring. Hey, everything okay? No, Daniel said. We have a problem. He told her everything, the man, the photo, the way Luna reacted. Rebecca was silent for a long time. Then finally she said, I don't like this. Neither do I. She exhaled sharply. I'll talk to Tom. Maybe even the sheriff. See if this guy has a record. In the meantime, be careful, Daniel. Daniel's grip tightened around the phone. He didn't need to be told twice. The break-in. It happened 2 nights later. Daniel had been extra cautious, double-checking the locks, keeping Luna and Finn inside at all times. But that night, something woke him, a creak outside. Daniel sat up, his heart hammering. He reached for the baseball bat he kept near the door and moved silently toward the window. Then he saw it, a shadow near the back fence. Daniel's blood ran cold. The man. Daniel's hands tightened around the bat. His breathing was steady, but inside, rage burned hot. He came back. And this time, Daniel wasn't going to just let him walk away. Daniel had never considered himself a violent man. But as he stood by the window, gripping the baseball bat tightly, watching that man lurk near his back fence, he felt something raw and protective surge through him. He wasn't just defending his home. He was defending Luna. He was defending Finn. And he wasn't about to let them go back to the life they had barely escaped from. Daniel moved quickly. He slipped on his boots, pulled on a jacket, and stepped out onto the back porch. The wind was sharp, biting against his face, but he barely felt it. The man was still near the fence, trying to lift the latch. Daniel's voice was like steel. I'd rethink that if I were you. The man froze. Then, slowly, he turned. You're making a mistake, he muttered, stepping closer. Daniel didn't move. No, you are. The man's eyes narrowed. That dog is mine. Daniel clenched his jaw. She stopped being yours the day you left her to die. A tense silence settled between them. The only sound was the distant crash of ocean waves against the shore. Then, movement behind Daniel, a soft growl. He didn't need to turn around to know Luna was there. He could feel her presence, her strength. The man sneered. She's got some fight in her, huh? Daniel's grip tightened on the bat. Yeah, and so do I. The man studied him for a long moment. Maybe he realized Daniel wasn't bluffing. Maybe he saw the rage in his eyes, the unwavering determination. Or maybe he saw the way Luna stood beside Daniel, no longer a cowering, broken dog, but a protector. The man scoffed, stepping back. Not worth it, he muttered. Then he turned and walked away. Daniel didn't relax until he heard the sound of a car starting in the distance. He let out a slow breath. Then he turned to Luna. She was still watching the fence, her ears pricked, body tense. Daniel knelt beside her. "Hey!" His voice was soft now, steady. "It's over." Luna blinked. Her tail gave the smallest wag. Then, to Daniel's absolute surprise, she licked his hand. Something inside him broke. Or maybe it healed. The next morning, Daniel walked into town. He found Sheriff Avery in his office and told him everything. About the man, about the photo, about Luna's past. Sheriff Avery frowned. "Did he hurt you?" "No," Daniel said, "but he wanted to take her." Avery leaned back in his chair. "I'll put the word out. If he shows his face again, we'll deal with it." Daniel nodded. "Thanks." The sheriff studied him for a moment. Then he said, "You know, Daniel, a few months ago, you wouldn't have bothered telling me any of this." Daniel smirked. "A few months ago, I didn't have something worth fighting for." Avery chuckled. "Guess things change." Daniel thought about Luna and Finn waiting for him back home. He thought about Jake, stopping by after school to play with Finn. He thought about his once empty house, now filled with soft paw steps, wagging tails, and the quiet warmth of companionship. And for the first time in 3 years, he felt whole again. Spring came early that year. The air was crisp and fresh, carrying the scent of salt and blooming wildflowers. The bookshop had never been busier. People came by, not just for books, but to see Luna and Finn. Jake officially became Finn's trainer, teaching him new tricks every afternoon. Maggie, Tom, Rebecca, even the usually reserved Mrs. Reynolds, lingered longer than they used to, chatting over coffee, bringing treats for the dogs. Daniel's world had expanded, piece by piece, until he was no longer just a man lost in grief. He was someone who had been found. One evening, Daniel sat on the porch steps watching Finn chase fireflies. Luna was beside him, her head resting on his knee. She had gained weight, her fur had regained its shine, and her golden eyes, once clouded with fear, now held peace. Daniel scratched behind her ears. "You chose me, huh?" Luna let out a soft breath. Daniel looked up at the sky, stars twinkling above. Then, with a small smile, he whispered, "Guess I needed saving too." Luna's tail thumped once, twice against the wooden porch, and Daniel knew this was exactly where they were meant to be.